inertia. Here's a Jack Ma-style intro for your motivational speech titled "The Indian Who Destroyed America's Diplomatic Game," written in a way that captures his tone, storytelling style, realism, and humility, without naming him. You know, when I was younger, people always told me what I couldn't do. You're not qualified. You don't come from a powerful family. You don't understand how the world works. And I believed them for a while. The truth is, the world doesn't always change because of armies, or money, or power. Sometimes, it changes because of one person, someone who refuses to play the game by the rules that were never written for them. Today, I want to tell you a story. A real one. About a man, an Indian, who didn't have a big title or international backing. He was trying to destroy anything. He was just standing up for what was right, for what made sense to him, for what was fair. And in doing so, he didn't just challenge the rules, he changed the entire game. Not with anger, not with violence, but with clarity, with courage, and with calm strength. Of course, here's a word expansion of both keynotes written in a motivational, storytelling tone inspired by Jack Ma's style, direct, humble, practical, and focused on real-world truths. One voice rooted in truth can shake the foundations of global power. Most people don't understand the weight of one voice until it's too loud to ignore. In today's world, where policies are dictated by complex alliances, billion-dollar deals, and invisible strategies, the idea that one individual, without military strength, without economic might, can impact the course of global diplomacy seems impossible. But truth doesn't care about titles. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for votes or validation. Truth just is. And when someone has the courage to speak it clearly, without fear, without calculation, it has a strange power. A silent but undeniable force that unsettles people used to control. See, in diplomacy, especially between superpowers, everything is layered. Words are chosen carefully. Messages are coded. Smiles high pressure. Agreements are sometimes just polite traps. And within this world, the expectation is that smaller countries or voices will always adjust, always bend, always compromise. That's how it's been for decades. But then comes someone who doesn't raise their voice, doesn't insult, doesn't attack, but speaks with such grounded truth that the entire system starts to feel exposed. Like a mirror has been held up, and suddenly the illusion isn't working anymore. One Indian did just that. Not by shouting, not by blaming, but by asking the questions no one wanted to answer. I sang, why should we play by rules that are not made for us? Why must we remain silent when something is clearly wrong? The most powerful thing about his words wasn't what he said. It was how obviously honest it was. It wasn't clever. It wasn't rehearsed. It was simply aligned with what millions were already feeling, but didn't know how to express. And that's where real impact comes from. Because when truth is spoken without fear, it does something dangerous. It removes the excuse of ignorance. When you hear truth, you can no longer pretend you didn't know. That's why power fears truth. That's why strong nations sometimes prefer vague speeches and strategic ambiguity. But one voice, with nothing to gain and nothing to hide, can become a spotlight. A spotlight that forces the world to stop, to listen, and to reevaluate. The foundations of global power are not only economic. They are also psychological. It's about influence, perception, dominance and narrative. But one sentence of truth can pierce through all that. One calm refusal to bow down can shake an entire diplomatic structure that has been taken for granted. That's exactly what happened. When that Indian leader spoke, he wasn't just delivering a message. He was inviting the world to reimagine balance, to reconsider fairness, to confront the biases they've comfortably lived with. It was not a rebellion. It was a reset. Real strength is not in aggression, but in refusing to be manipulated. We are often taught that to be strong, we must fight. That when someone challenges us, we must retaliate. That to prove our worth on the global stage, we must show muscle economically, politically, militarily. But that kind of strength is temporary. It's exhausting. It makes you predictable. The strongest people and the strongest nations are not the loudest, but the most self-aware. They don't need to react to everything. They don't rush to please or retaliate. They simply stay rooted in who they are. They see through the manipulation, and they refuse to play along. Manipulation in diplomacy is rarely obvious. It doesn't come with threats. It comes with praise, deals, expectations, and pressure dressed as friendship. Do this and we'll support you. Say this and we'll help you grow. Stay silent on this issue, and we'll look the other way on others. That's how the game works. And for many years, countries, especially those still developing, have accepted these conditions because they felt they had no choice. But slowly that's changing. Because a new generation of leaders, of thinkers, of citizens is starting to see the pattern. And they're not angry. They're just done pretending. The Indian who disrupted America's diplomatic strategy didn't threaten war, didn't insult anyone. He simply refused to accept a version of partnership that required silence. He exposed how often influence is mistaken for friendship. And in doing so, he reminded the world that standing up for your values doesn't require conflict, it requires clarity. It requires the ability to say, we hear you, we respect you, but we won't compromise our self-respect to keep the peace. That is power. Not the kind that invades borders, but the kind that defines them. Not the kind that wins elections, but the kind that wins integrity. Because when you refuse to be manipulated, you signal to the world that you can't be bought. You can't be scared. You can't be distracted. And that message echoes far beyond one conversation or one moment. It becomes a benchmark, a reference point, a warning to those who assume they can shape your destiny. And there's something even more powerful when others see it can be done. One country speaks up, and others start to believe they can too. One individual takes a stand, and suddenly millions remember their voice matters. That's how movements begin. Not with slogans, not with noise, but with quiet conviction. That's how dignity grows, not by defeating others, but by refusing to defeat yourself in the process. That's the lesson. That's the core of true motivation and leadership. Not becoming stronger than others, but becoming stronger than your fears. Because when you're no longer afraid of losing approval, you become unstoppable. You negotiate with confidence, not desperation. You connect with allies, not dependents. You listen, but you don't obey blindly. You lead, and the world notices. It may not praise you openly. It may criticize. It may try to isolate. But quietly, everyone takes note. Because when someone breaks free from manipulation, it exposes the mechanics others are still trapped in. And that creates a ripple, one that can't be unseen, one that will shape every negotiation, every conversation, every alliance moving forward.